Hey there, I am TL Painter, and I am creating a Zeldalike inspired by games like Minish Cap. Over the last couple of weeks, I have implemented a number of critical mechanics, including things like pushing and pulling on objects, and even throwing and breaking them, which is, to me, the most essential part of a Zeldalike, breaking pots. In today's devlog, I'm going to be going over my object interaction system, dialogue system, pickups for things like health and currency, and resources for energy and magic. Something I have been doing that has been extremely helpful is exporting a set of debug variables for all of my code. This allows me to control what is printed in the output panel by checking a box and configuring things like the name of an entity when it prints into the debug panel. This is really handy, and also Godot puts a nice little bug icon next to the debug if you name your category debug. For some code that may need more robust debugging, I have a debug me verbose variable. This essentially tells the code to not just print its core debug information, but to print just a wall of text sometimes. Things like trying to get the coordinates of a thrown object as it is thrown so that I can track its trajectory and maybe why it's going in a certain direction are used for this sort of purpose. Before I could implement things like pushing and pulling in my system, I had to put together something I had been dreading since before starting this project: state machines. If you don't know what state machines are, neither do a lot of people. It is essentially a way to track the current state of an entity. Is the entity walking? Are they running? Are they attacking? That sort of thing. Generally, you want to ensure that an entity can only be in one state at a time, at least if the entity is not too complicated. My player is, of course, going to be more complicated than most entities, though they actually have state layers. So the state layer essentially controls a collection of different states. Each of those states have something to do with what that layer's name is. So I might have a movement layer, and then the player can have multiple different move states. They can have the move, the idle, run, that sort of thing. It just tells me how is the player moving at this moment in time. The next layer I have is the action layer state. This is all of the actions the player can conduct. Things like no action is the default, so the player is not currently taking an action. Then there's grabbing, pulling, lifting, holding, that sort of thing. What is the player doing right now besides moving around or not moving around? And my final layer is the no control layer. It is a layer for states that the player has no control over, that their input doesn't really affect. Or if it does, it's more of an indirect effect. It's something that the entire game controls for the player. Above all three of my state layers is the state coordinator. This is the node and script that controls all the layers, communicates with them, communicates between them, and then lets those layers know, hey, you should be in this state, you should be in this state, you can move to this state, you can't move to this state. State coordinator is not that long of a script, which is nice. I try to keep all of these scripts fairly short, although they eventually get out of hand, as tends to happen. I was able to use the state coordinator to communicate between these instead of having to constantly call things back and forth. This does require a lot of wiring in the editor, as you might expect, but it's fairly easy to set everything up once you know what you're doing. I don't know if Minish Cap explicitly uses a state machine. If it does have one, it would look something like this. Link is currently idling, Link picks something up, Link is moving, and then Link is throwing. These are the states that Link is currently in, and then you communicate with the rest of the game what Link is able to do in the situation. I should, at this point, be able to implement my grab, push, lift, throw, drop states, but I can't yet because I actually want to have something that I can interact with on the field. So I downloaded a sprite, finally, and got to work on my own piece of art. Now, I did use a sprite that I have already purchased from an asset pack. Links for all of the assets that I use in this in the description. I took that pot, sketched around on it, added a crack to it. Then I started taking all of those pieces that I'd broken up, moving them around, shrinking them down until I had what looked like a pretty basic breaking animation. None of this is final. I created this break animation, brought it into Godot, made sure that it played as I expected, and then I was able to start working on the actual interactable here. Now, I already have an interaction system set up. You should probably see that in my previous devlog, but essentially the player can walk up to a collision and then press the context key, which in this case is the Y button on my controller, or action button 4, and then that action takes place based on what interactable it is that they are with and the current state of the player. So for this one, the player will walk up to it and then they can press the interaction button to grab onto it or lift it up depending on what they're doing, and that will change the state the player is in based on how they interacted with that entity. The real complication with trying to get this grab and pull to move wasn't necessarily setting up the state entry and exit, it was controlling how the player and the pot would move together. I'm still not certain that I have this exactly the way that I want it. I don't like the constant snapping that it does, so I need to set up an actual move to this point, then stop. But at the moment, the player grabs onto the pot, and then based on the direction you input, will either push the pot forward a set number of pixels or pull the pot back a set number of pixels. And it works. It doesn't quite look the way that I want it to. However, trying to get things to work right now is my main priority, and then adjusting the feel is something I'm going to work on in the future. I have this function working, and I can move on to the next one, which is throwing the pot. I do have it set so the player can throw the pot, and the pot is thrown based on their facing direction. Beyond that though, I also wanted to add things like sound effects to the pot moving and controlling and throwing and all of that, because that really helps with the feel. Even if they're not permanent sound effects, which these are definitely are not, as you'll notice, they're kind of annoying. They are still good to have, and they still improve the feel astronomically once you start hearing the pot drag across the ground, or hear a noise when it's picked up or placed down, or even better, when you throw the pot and it breaks and it plays a little shatter sound. That's great, and that feels so much better already. So with that key interaction functionality complete, I moved on to energy and magic resources. Now this is something I'm not 100% sold on in my game. This is part of prototyping, is doing things that I'm not totally certain are going to work or feel good. This system is essentially to avoid a problem where you might want to spam certain features and things like that. Instead, you have to kind of control how often you're doing these things, and then you can get them back later. Magic systems have been in Zelda games for a very long time. You have magic that has even powered your items. For energy, I made a little lightning bolt sprite because now I was an expert in a sprite. I clearly wasn't, and I don't think lightning is a great indicator of energy for the kind of theme I'm going for. It will almost definitely change by the time I move on to the actual art phase and decide what energy is going to be represented by. I set up a simple debug system in my game to allow me to increase and decrease the player's energy. When the player's energy reaches 0, they become exhausted, at which point all of the energy will flash red, and you can't do anything that would consume energy until you fully recover. For magic, I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more, so I created an inverted pentagram, which took a lot of trial and error, but eventually I had this little medallion with an inverted pentagram on it. And each of the points of the star, as well as the center of it, represent 1 point of magic. So you can have a total of 6 points of magic in a single medallion. To further complicate things for myself, unlike the hearts, for example, which have 4, and if you don't have all 4 pieces of a heart, then that heart doesn't appear, the medallion actually allows you to use a point on the medallion even if you don't have the medallion completed. The reason this complicated things is because I needed a signifier for you have this point in the medallion, but it's currently depleted, and then one for you don't have this point in the medallion, and then this is how much you have currently in the medallion. So for example, if there's a medallion where you only have 3 parts of it and you've depleted 1 part of it, that's a unique sprite, as opposed to having a full medallion and you only have 2 parts left. But it does work in the game now. You can have a certain amount of shards for your magic medallion, and it shows up as it should. Now you have energy, you have magic, you have hearts, and you have no real way to replenish it inside of the game when you lose these resources. So let's create a way to actually recover and replenish these resources with pickups, another Zelda staple. I wanted to create energy, magic, health, and currency pickups. For the currency, I went for beads, because again, I'm not totally sold on what the theme of this game is, so I just wanted to make something a little interesting. They look really weird, and this 100% is not something that would be final in the game, but it works for right now. And when they animate, they have this nice little gleam that goes across them in a sort of circular pattern so that it looks like the bead is actually 3-dimensional. I was pretty proud of that one, even though I still think they look terrible. I at least made that little gleam animation look nice. And when you pick them up, a little dialog box appears at the bottom, giving you a description of what it is you just picked up if it's the first time you did it, just like in Minish Cap. Oh yeah, the dialog box. I guess I did promise to explain how that works in my last video, so I wanted to create a unique dialogue system for my game, and this proved to be a bit more of a challenge than I anticipated, partly because I had to learn how Godot reads CSV files and what all of that looks like, how I can interact with it, how I can pull data from that. Just wound up being a little more than I anticipated working on, but I got the dialogue system working, and here's how the dialogue system functions. It uses 5 scripts. First is the dialog DB, which is the dialog database. This pulls all of the data from the CSV and stores it. Next is the speak component. This is a simple node that I attach to any NPC or sign or whatever that tells them, hey, when someone interacts with you and the interaction is a speak interaction, these are the points of dialogue you are able to use. This is the dialogue resource that you will refer to. Next is the interact dialog. This is a special interact area where if the player is in this, they interact with it and then it activates the speak component that is attached to that character. Next is the resource dialog. This is really what controls a bulk of what it is that you see when dialogue is entered. The dialog resource knows what lines from the CSV to refer to and which of those columns have data in them. It also controls how you advance the dialogue, because if I'm talking to the character, maybe I want them to just choose a random line from this array of dialogue in the dialog resource, or maybe I want it to be sequential and we go through 1, 2, and 3, and then we're done and we switch to a static dialogue line, something like they have nothing left to say ... or something along those lines. So I can control how that interacts. I can give them random lines of dialogue, a series of them, all that in the resource dialog, and then I can just attach that same dialogue to multiple NPCs if I want to. And then all those NPCs can have the same sequences of dialogue, some of the same sequences of dialogue. They can go through them sequentially and others can go through them randomly, whatever the case may be. And then we have the one that was also not super fun to make, the dialogue controller. This is the last script in the system, and this basically tells you how you're looking at the dialogue. Now, thankfully, this one was easier to build. It was still annoying, but it was easier to build because this is pretty much how almost every dialogue script is going to do things. This is what handles, for example, typing out the characters as you read them, how fast that goes, whether or not pressing an interaction button while the dialogue is typing skips ahead. This is what tells you what it is you're seeing when you are interacting with a dialogue component. Now, before I leave you, I should probably talk about currency, the last thing. Currency is important in a system like this, and I want you to be able to buy things and purchase upgrades and items and that sort of thing. So in order to do that, I actually need a monetary system. I made this absolutely gorgeous dollar bill to represent the wallets, and then I made these, again, just stunningly beautiful wallet sprites. I'm not an artist. I made these and I put those into the game along with the beads so that when you collect the beads, it adds it to the currency, and then the currency plays this nice stretching animation. You hear some sounds as the currency is added to your system, and it quickly counts up to whatever the goal is. And I have a set goal for how long that animation should take. I never really liked it in Zelda when it just continuously counted at the same rate until I got to the next one. So if you got 100 rupees, sometimes it could take a long time to get to that. Whereas for this, it always takes, I think it's half a second. And yeah, that's all I have to... Oh, you saw the grass cutting. I think I should save the grass cutting for the next devlog, so we'll talk about that then. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this devlog. Things are really coming together, and I have a wealth of mechanics already built out with more on the way. I have constructed so much of this game just from scratch, and it feels good to have something made with my own hands, my own brain, that looks, or at least feels... It doesn't look or feel super good right now, but it does function, and that's nice. I'm trying to come up with style and theme ideas, and I think I have a pretty good idea, so I hope you stay tuned for that. I and a huge swath of my team were laid off at the start of this year, and I have just kind of poured my heart into this in between applying for jobs, and it has felt pretty good. And this is a nice little pocket of the internet for me to hang out in and do my weird little project, so thank you for being part of that, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.